Hey, what's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to Get Hit with the Truth. So today we're doing a what's next on the undefeated, arguably the pound-for-pound king of boxing, and the newly crowned 4-weight world champion, former 2-division undisputed world champion, Terence "Bud" Crawford, following his hard-fought but deserving 12-round decision victory over Israil Madrimov as they main evented the August 3rd pay-per-view card from LA for Riyadh season. Now, before we get into that, if you could smash the like button, leave a comment, or subscribe to the channel, I really do appreciate any and all support that I can get as I continue to build my channel here. So, you know, Crawford, this was a harder than expected fight for most. I felt like he was going to be in there. You know, I predicted him to win a decision. I did think that Madrimov, because of his amateur resume and his skill level, and because he's just a naturally bigger guy, I felt like it was going to be somewhat difficult for Crawford. I felt like he handled things well. He controlled the action with his jab. Madrimov was good with his timing and his feints, though, and I think that threw Crawford off a little bit. Again, moving up. A lot of times when a guy moves up to a new weight, his first fight, he doesn't look great. And then after that, he kind of feels into the weight and looks better. But be that as it may, Crawford won. And now the big question is, what's next for Crawford following this victory? So we start with, I mean, we have to factor in the Canelo Alvarez fight. As of right now, it seems like it's off the table. Turki Al-Sheikh was a little upset with Canelo. Doesn't really want to work with them now, at least for the moment. When you got a guy like Canelo, though, you know, you put your tail between your legs at some point and work with him if the guy's willing to work with you. Do I believe Crawford and Canelo is a possibility? Not as much anymore, at least not for Crawford's next fight. But, you know, he seems pretty set on wanting to fight Canelo. So we're going to see if this one could possibly take place next. Then there's Sebastian Fundora, the WBC WBO unified champ. This is an interesting one because Crawford not only became the WBA champ with the win over Madrimov, he became the mandatory he became the interim champion of the WBO, which puts him in line for Fundora, and he also became the WBC's #1 ranked contender. So he's basically in line to fight for both the belts that Fundora holds. We know Fundora is going to fight Errol Spence next. If Fundora comes through that fight against Spence, I do think there's a possibility him and Crawford match up. You know, Crawford's going to wait around for this fight. It's only taking place in October. Crawford doesn't rush to get back into the ring. I'm sure he's going to enjoy having more time off than the winner of that fight, especially if it's Fundora. So, you know, or even Spence to set up a rematch, because I think Crawford, if he doesn't get the showdown with Canelo, I think his goal is going to be unification here at 154. Although we did hear now that there's the possibility of Triple G Gennady Golovkin, which would likely take place at a catch weight, maybe a little bit over 160 pounds. We know that was thrown on the table. We don't know if that's a real fight or not. But as of right now, I do think a Fundora fight could be what Crawford does next. Now, is it a great matchup for him? Not necessarily. But he has two of the belts, and Crawford is the mandatory for both of those belts. So I absolutely think that Crawford and Fundora could happen. Then you got Tim Tszyu, the former WBO champion. Tszyu seems set on fighting Bakram Murtazalayev next. He's the mandatory. If he's victorious there, would Turki Al-Sheikh work with Tszyu? Because Al-Sheikh was kind of upset at Tszyu for not waiting and taking on like a Virgil Ortiz ahead of the fight with instead of the fight with Murtazalayev, but Tszyu wants to become the world champion again, so he went his own direction, and you know that kind of pissed off Turki Al-Sheikh. But I think he might come back to the table. Tszyu's a big draw. That'd be a good fight, especially if Tszyu's a world champion. So I think it is possible. Then you got former undisputed champ Jermell Charlo. another one that I think is very possible. Charlo announced he's returning. He's throwing himself back in the mix. But would Charlo wait around to fight Crawford next? I think he would, but I really think he'd prefer getting another fight in, since he really has been very inactive. I mean, if you realistically look at it, his knockout win in the rematch against Brian Castano was back in May of 2022. So he hasn't really done anything since that. You know, he hasn't done hardly anything at all. You know, he fought Canelo and got his ass beat and really didn't show up and do much. So I think Charlo is going to wait around. It might want to return first, and maybe Crawford would want that for Charlo too. And I think that would be better. If Charlo comes back and gets a solid win over a decent fighter, that would probably set up a bigger fight. So I do think Charlo's a possibility on the list, but I don't think it's going to happen. Then there's Israil Madrimov, a rematch. I don't see a rematch taking place. I think Crawford feels like he won this fight clean. We know Madrimov's not a big name. Some people, there's not a high demand from the boxing community for a rematch, so I don't think Crawford's going to entertain that. So I don't see that one. Then you got Sergey Bohachuk. Coming off the loss to Virgil Ortiz, he fought his ass off. A lot of people thought Bohachuk won the fight. He was the interim champion coming in. He now lost that belt. I don't see him and Crawford linking up because he suffered the loss. I don't see it, but man, that would have been a good one. But I just don't see Crawford. I think he's going to have to win another fight in order to land that fight with Crawford. Then you got Erickson Lubin. I don't see him being a possibility. Lubin is a good fighter, but years ago he got knocked out in the first round against Charlo. He's been knocked out against Fundora a couple years back in a Fight of the Year candidate. Even his last win to get back in the mix over Jesus Ramos was kind of like a controversial, ugly win. So I don't think Lubin is being considered. Then you got Jesus Ramos. Ramos hasn't really done anything since that loss to Lubin. He kind of undersold himself in that fight with Lubin, and I think he kind of took himself out of the mix. Brian Mendoza not in the mix. He suffered that loss to Bohachuk earlier this year. He lost to Tim Tszyu last year, so I don't see that. Bakram Murtazalayev, the IBF champion, not seeing that one. He's not a big name. I don't think the boxing community would like two guys that nobody really knows in a row for Crawford. I don't think Crawford wants that. Virgil Ortiz, very, very interesting matchup right here. This one could happen. You know, Ortiz got a win. He showed that he's vulnerable. Do I think Crawford's going to consider him next? Maybe, because he seems more beatable now. He is the interim champion in the WBC, so I think Crawford's kind of leaning away from that one, even though Turki Al-Sheikh wanted that fight. But I don't know if Turki Al-Sheikh wants that fight now, the way Ortiz looked against Bohachuk. He didn't look bad. They gave him the decision, but it wasn't a dominant performance. So I think Crawford might stay away from that. Anybody outside of the top 10, I don't really see anybody as a possibility outside of Errol Spence if Spence beats Sebastian Fundora. And then again, you have the Triple G scenario that got laid out. So if there's a long road to the Canelo fight, then maybe next May, Triple G could be an option for Crawford. I really think a real big front runner is the winner of Fundora and Spence for the unified belts. I still think Tim Tszyu and Jermell Charlo are kind of back burner options. And I guess we can throw Boots in there again, but I really don't think Crawford's considering Boots as his next opponent. So it's going to be interesting to see what Terence Crawford does. But that's it. That's what I got. That's my what's next on Terence Bud Crawford, the newly crowned WBA Super Welterweight Champ at 154. And I hope you enjoyed the video. This is True Boxing. You've been hit with the truth.